We are awarding Edvard Grieg a special prize for the most original arrangement of a folk melody and demonstrating that he not only worked at the highest technical level but was also, contrary to the somewhat dismissive judgment of German critics in particular, an independent and inspired composer in this field as well. To truly appreciate his ideas, however, we must first use a standard model for variations, one that all pianists have in mind, to illustrate what the real challenge is. Then we must analyze the challenges Grieg faced in his choice of melody. In this way, we can ultimately demonstrate how skillfully he proceeded and what we can learn from him regarding interpretation and composition. We're willing to bet that every pianist automatically has a model in mind when variations are mentioned. Mozart's variations on the children's song vous-dirai-je, Maman. And indeed, there is hardly a simpler model, an extremely simple, highly repetitive ABA form without any melodic complexity, which almost never strays from a harmonic pattern of tonic and dominant in major. Mozart drastically simplified the original melody even further. We will focus on the harmonic variation, as this is what will be of interest in Grieg's arrangement of the Norwegian melody. Mozart faces a difficult task here. To make the simple children's song somewhat more expressive harmonically, he makes use of the expanded possibilities offered by a transposition into a minor key. He does this in Variation 8. The climax of expressiveness here is a passus duriusculus, which is first heard in the melody over a pedal note in G and then echoed in the bass as a so-called lament bass. In the 18th century, the music theorist Christoph Bernhard used the term passus duriusculus to describe a chromatically descending or ascending melody. The simple children's song offered Mozart complete freedom of interpretation and adaptation. Grieg, however, faced a different challenge. To truly understand this, we must first recognize, in general terms, which source materials are suitable for variations. They must not possess a strong character of their own or any outstanding formal characteristics. In such cases, variations would merely serve to dismantle a perfect aesthetic statement. Incidentally, a similar problem arises when setting text to music. Composers do not choose the great lyrical masterpieces for this purpose, but rather texts that can be imbued with meaning through music. Schubert, for example, did this as in the cycle Die schöne Müllerin, with the poems of Wilhelm Müller, which in their own right would hardly have made art history. The piece we'll be focusing on here is the 16th of the 25 Norwegian folk songs and dances from Grieg's Opus 17. The melodies come from a collection by the musicologist Ludwig Lindemann, which Grieg adopts verbatim. The 16th is titled I Know a Little Maiden and is 12 measures long. A 4-measure motif is repeated with variations. The third section is a kind of response phrase. The rhythmic pattern, however, is practically the same 3 times over. Only at the very end does the repetition give way to a drawn-out closing phrase. The third section, therefore, seems abbreviated to 2 measures. In the second section, the minor key effectively dictates the harmonization. The closing phrase also effectively necessitates a complete cadence. In contrast to the children's song, where Mozart was still free to vary the melody as he pleased, a fair amount of form and material is predetermined here, which must be seen as a challenge. Let's take a look at what harmonization the structure of the melody naturally suggests. We can stick to the version found online as a reference. It comes from Frank Nordberg. Following the logic of the melody, he harmonizes the first phrase with a 1-5-1 cadence. The second phrase, due to the melodic minor mode, obviously begins with a 1-5-1 cadence in F minor. Also following the melodic logic, it subsequently resolves to the parallel key of A flat major. The third phrase finally returns to F minor via the subdominant D flat of the parallel key with a perfect cadence. If you want to avoid the detour into the parallel key of G major, you can experiment further with the minor variations. To do this, we expand the perfect cadence of the first phrase with the half-diminished second degree. And repeat the whole thing in the second phrase. For improvisation, it would be best to choose a harmonic minor here. You can download a PDF from the Academia l'Art website that includes a sheet music and many more details on this. We end the third phrase by enriching the expressiveness with a D flat as an intermediate dominant. Classical musicians will read this as a German sixth, jazz musicians as a tritone substitute for the intermediate dominant G major. If a jazz musician counts the measures of the melody, there are 12 as mentioned, and studies the structure, which could be interpreted as a question-question-answer pattern, they might be tempted to see a kind of minor blues in the song. This has its merits and could expand the options for improvisation in an appealing way. Before we turn our attention to Grieg's original harmonization of the song, however, let's take a quick look at its history. Grieg's collection of Norwegian folk songs and dances was composed in 1869. The 19th century is regarded as the century of nation-state formation. This was accompanied by a newly awakened interest among composers in the folk traditions of their homelands. It found its way into their own works. This applies to some extent to Chopin, who drew inspiration from Polish folk music, to Isaac Albanese in Spain, to Bedřich Smetana in the Czech Republic, to Modest Mussorgsky, Alexander Borodin, and Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov in Russia, and to Jean Sibelius in Finland. Universalists who believed they had to defend the autonomy of music viewed these trends critically. This is evidenced by what Grieg once wrote: "I have arranged folk songs for the piano, I have freely rendered folk ballads for the male voice. In 3 or 4 of my works I have attempted to use Norwegian songs thematically." As such, I should be allowed to say that nothing is more incorrect than the claim by certain German critics that my so-called originality is limited to my borrowing from folk music. It is quite another matter if a nationalistic spirit, which has been expressed through folk music since ancient times, permeates my original creative works. The incorporation of folkloric and national elements into art music can be understood as a populist retreat into nationalism. However, the turf wars of nationalist music took place less on this front. Consider, for example, the conflicts between followers of Debussy and Wagner, or the political significance of Italian opera. Ultimately, the arrangements by Grieg, Albanese, Chopin, Smetana, or Sibelius did not lead to identity-political retreats into nationalism. Rather, they opened up regional musical traditions to a global audience. As if it were an opera overture, Grieg introduces the first motif as an opening signal in unison at the beginning of the arrangement. But then the piece does not begin in the expected F minor, but in D flat major, and proceeds to F minor via the intermediate dominant F7, the subdominant B flat minor, and a superdominant. The perfect cadence at the beginning of the second section is set by the melodic minor scale. However, Grieg then inserts an E flat minor between the tonic F minor and the dominant C, which, if one wishes, can be interpreted as a borrowing from an F Phrygian mode. Grieg harmonizes the third section with a concluding perfect cadence consisting of the subdominant, dominant, and tonic, enriched by a minorization of the subdominant and a fourth suspension in the dominant. In the repetition of the melody in the bass, one passage in particular is noteworthy. since the upper voice is no longer bound to the melody, it can be used for harmonic subtleties. This is particularly the case in the conclusion of the first section, which Grieg leads over a classical Neapolitan sixth chord. As a reminder, the Neapolitan sixth chord is a minor subdominant chord in which the minor sixth is substituted for the fifth. It forms the minor ninth of the scale and thus conveys a sense of profound sorrow. It was used in this way particularly in Baroque opera. Arrangements of folk songs and dances by great composers are ideal as an introduction to classical improvisation. The source material must be straightforward, ideally comprising 12 or 32 measures, 12 for a blues association, and present an original, easily graspable harmonic progression. This also corresponds to the standard repertoire of jazz improvisation, as a glance at a jazz fakebook will immediately confirm. For the Grieg piece discussed here, the Academia l'Art website offers a PDF with detailed resources, sheet music in C, B, and E-flat, harmonic analyses, tips for improvisation, and so on. The link can be found in the comments section of the video. In addition to Grieg's arrangement, Schubert's Gebelli variations or Schumanns of foreign lands and people are suitable examples. Videos on these topics can be found on the Academia l'Art channel page. The Schumann segment is featured in this video. And anyone who would like to learn more about the theoretical foundations of Academia l'Art should study this video.